latest outgoing fire from the president aimed at members of his own party and his administration as he goes after Senator Corker's height and Secretary Tillerson's IQ. Also following the president's national security meeting today on North Korea, and after he declared this the calm before the storm, tonight we get a rare look inside from a journalist just back from there during a time of foreboding. Plus the rolling tragedy in California, the death toll growing. Over 2,000 structures are just gone. A live report tonight as the 11th hour gets underway. Good evening once again from our NBC News headquarters here in New York, day 264 of the Trump administration, and tonight this president remains on the attack with people he needs at home and around the world. It started with the president extending his public fight with Secretary of State Rex Tillerson into day 6. In an interview with Forbes magazine, the president talked about the NBC News reports that Tillerson called him a moron. He said, quote, "I think it's fake news, but if he did that, I guess we'll have to compare IQ tests, and I can tell you who is going to win." A few hours after Forbes posted the interview, the president was asked about it at the White House while sitting next to former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger.
Did you undercut the Secretary of State today with the IQ comment?
No, I didn't undercut anybody. I don't believe in undercutting people. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Yes. And within an hour of that exchange, Tillerson arrived at the White House to have lunch with the president. We have seen no bylined reporting in any major publications as of yet about how that conversation went. Then a few hours later still, Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders took questions about the seemingly conflicting messages coming from her boss.
Over the weekend, the president said that he wished his Secretary of State was a little tougher, and now today he is suggesting that Secretary Tillerson has a lower IQ than he does. So my question is, why would the president want somebody who thinks is neither tough nor particularly smart as a Secretary of State?
The president certainly never implied that the Secretary of State was not incredibly intelligent. He made a joke, nothing more than that.
Well,
he has full confidence. He has full confidence in the Secretary of State. They had a great visit earlier today, and they're working hand in hand to move the president's agenda forward.
Working hand in hand, but new reporting from Jonathan Lemire at the Associated Press reports that Trump might be making Tillerson's job more difficult in terms of the wider world audience. He writes, quote, "Trump's comments have threatened to undermine Tillerson's diplomatic initiatives and sow confusion among allies and foes over whether he speaks for the U.S. and has the support of the White House." The president and his staff also took aim at Senator Bob Corker again today. The president wrote this on Twitter this morning. The failing New York Times set little, punctuation is his, little Bob Corker up by recording his conversation, was made to sound a fool, and that's what I am dealing with. Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders also went after Senator Bob Corker, giving a misleading account of Corker's role. Then she took a shot at Republicans in Congress in general.
Two of the president's allies have suggested that Senator Corker resign. Does the president think that Senator Corker should resign?
I think that's a decision for Senator Corker and the people of Tennessee, not for us to decide.
A follow-up on the Senator Corker question. The president also said this weekend that Senator Corker was largely responsible for the Iran deal, which the president has hinted that he wants to renegotiate. That was a deal that was negotiated by Barack Obama's administration. Why does the president think that that was largely Bob Corker's fault?
Senator Corker worked with Nancy Pelosi and the Obama administration to pave the way for that legislation and basically rolled out the red carpet for the Iran deal. I mean, those are pretty factual.
What do you say to critics who say that the president is alienating himself from Republicans that he will need to move his legislation forward?
I don't think he's alienated anyone. I think that Congress has alienated themselves by not actually getting the job done that the people of this country elected them to do.
Let's go to our leadoff panel tonight. Robert Costa, national political reporter for The Washington Post and moderator of Washington Week on PBS. Ashley Parker, White House reporter for The Washington Post. And here in New York, the aforementioned Jonathan Lemire, White House reporter for the AP. All three MSNBC political analysts. A bit of old business we should clarify. Senator Corker was aware of the taping of his interview, audio taping with the New York Times. All right, Robert Costa, talk about what you know on both prongs of this. The president versus Senator Corker, the president versus Secretary Tillerson, and yes, this is the plot line of today.
Brian, first on the Secretary of State, associates of the Secretary of State tell me that Tillerson has been frustrated with his position. He talked with the president on Friday. He talked with General Kelly over the weekend, again with the president today, trying to get the relationship repaired between him and President Trump. They know it's been really at odds with each other for weeks now, and for the sake of the upcoming summit with China, for the sake of the crisis that's unfolding in North Korea, the White House believes it's a priority to make sure that Tillerson stays, at least for the moment, in spite of all the problems. And then when you think about Senator Corker, it's revealing of where the president is with congressional Republicans, a party splitting apart, a president almost more comfortable being an outsider.
And Ashley, we say this all the time, another day in the life of this administration. So what was today about at the White House, if anything other than this?
I think it was just about this. And you even saw that in the questions in today's briefing. I mean, a tremendous amount of time was devoted to what was going on with Senator Corker, what may or may not be happening behind the scenes with Secretary of State Tillerson. And you just get the sense, publicly and privately, that the White House is spending a ton of time managing relationships that they, to be clear, should not have to be managing. This is a Republican senator. This is a cabinet member who the president himself chose. They have a lot of legislative issues they could be focusing on, but the day, again, publicly and privately, was spent dealing with personnel matters that really shouldn't be personnel matters.
And Ashley, you remind me and us we are actually prepared for something you mentioned. Here is a sampling of the subject areas, some of the questions that came up at the briefing at your White House today.
Over the weekend, Senator Bob Corker called the White House an adult daycare center, said the president could lead the country into World War III, and said to, quote, "He concerns me, he would have to concern anyone who cares about our nation."
Over the last few months, the president has criticized a number of senior Republicans, sometimes in very personal terms.
Sarah, in a speech this morning, the president referred to middle alleged Bob Corker again.
The president repeated this claim in the Oval Office today, saying we're the highest tax nation in the world. Why does the president keep saying this? It's not true overall.
Is it appropriate for the Vice President of the United States to spend taxpayer money to go to a football game where he's going to walk out if players take a knee, knowing that he would be taking that action?
Is the president telling the truth about this account?
He said change the tax law. He doesn't actually mean change the tax law.
The president expects the Secretary of State to be effective when he's questioning his intelligence.
So back to Ashley for a second. Ashley, can you tell our viewers how far from normal, how far off plumb this is?
Well, this is a White House press corps that at this point doesn't startle or surprise particularly easily. But there is, as you just rolled that montage, sort of a surreal quality to all of this. Just sort of the barrage and the onslaught and the types of questions that are being asked, and the extent to which the White House press secretary is having to, in public, sort of litigate half-truths, mistruths. And as you heard in one of these questions, something that's come up repeatedly in the briefing room, the president is saying something that we know to be factually untrue about the tax rate, and he continues to repeat it. So it's odd.
Jonathan Lemire, this is why I love the journalists we get to talk to here every night. You wrote today about the IQ comment, Trump on Tillerson. The remark landed with a distinct hint of malice. You know, the truth is, for as many words as this president knows and uses, he never says anything by accident. There's a design behind everything, even if it's a seeming ad-lib.
Right. This is also a president who is not exactly known for his sense of humor. He knew exactly what he was doing in relitigating in public yet again this feud, this dispute he has with his Secretary of State, who in private he's been bashing for weeks. He's been upset about any number of things. He was upset that the Secretary of State criticized his response to Charlottesville when the president said there are good people on both sides, and Tillerson came out and said, more or less, the president speaks for himself and is not the moral conscience of this nation. He is telling people he is upset that he doesn't feel that Tillerson is appropriately loyal, that he hasn't defended him enough in public. He doesn't feel like that he and Tillerson see eye to eye on foreign policy. He thinks Tillerson is on the wrong side of a number of issues. The Iran deal, the Paris Climate Accord. They're one of the rare wins for Tillerson, if you will, at this point in the administration, was maintaining the status quo and a slight increase of a number of troops in Afghanistan, which you'll recall only came about after Tillerson, Secretary Mattis, and others had to have a tutorial for the president at the Pentagon, explaining to him why this mattered, why it mattered that America have a robust presence across the world. This is someone the president, it doesn't seem at this moment like he's willing to fire him, although that could change at a moment's notice, but he seems that Rex Tillerson is now in Jeff Sessions' old chair, the cabinet member who is taking an unprecedented public scolding from his president.
So, Robert Costa, according to your reporting and others, we have Mattis counseling the president and Tillerson to stay together for the sake of the kids, in effect. And on the Corker front, my question to you is, anything but a chorus of crickets following Corker's interview among fellow Republicans on Capitol Hill?
Well, there have always been critics in the Republican Party of President Trump. What's most telling about Senator Corker's break from the president is that he was someone who tried to build a relationship with Trump during the campaign. He was even considered for the vice presidential slot. He saw the president as someone early on who was different from the Republican establishment, who was not a hawk when it came to foreign policy. So for him to walk away, that shows you that Trump allies, at least one-time Trump allies, are starting to walk away. But some Republicans, the major Republicans we cover, they do remain quite quiet tonight because they still believe they need the president to get something done on tax cuts, something to put on the plate for voters in 2018, and until they get that, they're going to stay mum.
Ashley, I have to ask you, the president tweeted tonight, and this was about his chief of staff. Fake news is at it again, this time trying to hurt one of the finest people I know, General John Kelly, by saying he will soon be, long line of periods, fired. This story is totally made up by the dishonest media. The chief is doing a fantastic job for me and, more importantly, for the USA. Ashley, what's the president reading or seeing on television now?
So I have to say that we were sort of at the post trying to puzzle that out. I'm a little unclear, to be honest, although there have been a number of stories that have not said that General Kelly is going to be fired. I don't think there's any really strong evidence to support this at this point, but that are reflecting sort of the challenging relationship between these two men, which is, by all accounts, the president does respect General Kelly in a way he didn't respect his previous chief of staff, and in many ways appreciates what he's doing, but sort of like with a parent, sometimes a parent is doing what may need to be done or what you sort of realize at a gut level is the correct thing, but it's still frustrating, you still kind of chafe at it, and I think the president is reading stories that reflect that frustration on both ends, frankly. Kelly, too, isn't exactly always happy with what the president is saying or doing or tweeting or what's getting leaked to the media, and that's what he saw that prompted that tweet. But I can't point you to a specific article.
And Jonathan, of course, this is all interconnected. A, you lose a day of productivity. By the way, some people would look at the White House operation today to all of the things we're covering tonight. B, Bob Corker is not just chairman of Senate Foreign Relations and is a key player they're going to need, for starters, on tax reform.
That's right. This is not someone the president can cast aside. We saw that he was short Republican votes for healthcare.
Yeah.
You know,
They have an operating majority.
that they do. They control the Senate. Yet, that this president has not been able, in conjunction with the majority leader, to marshal members of his own party to get his agenda passed. Attacking, yet again, a sitting senator seems to endanger that going forward. This is a White House that is so often tripped up by the president's tweets, by these little feuds. There's great frustration there that there has not been more done on tax reform. Certainly, the Hill is frustrated that the White House keeps getting its own way on this. You know, that we have at least two significant foreign policy crises right now. And the president is feuding with the Secretary of State in light of the nuclear threat posed by North Korea, as well as the imminent decision looming in Iran over the nuclear pact there. This is a White House that, because of the president's inability to let perceived slights go, is not able to move forward with the promises that they made their voters last year and simply the common pledges to any American citizen.
Bob Costa, last word. Do you take Mr. Bannon at his word that we may see a kind of Republican subset, a nationalist subset of people because establishment Republicans got primaried back home, and so you'll have Donald Trump-like candidates, House, Senate, perhaps coming and getting sworn in that building behind you?
The question, Brian, is going to be how many of those nationalist-type Republicans are going to win the primaries next year. I do take Bannon at his word that he's going to launch an all-out war in 2018 against the Republican establishment, and even in states like Wyoming, where a local key senator, John Barrasso, is facing some possible challenges now, they may see some primary rivals, but at the end of the day, the Republican Party in many parts of the country still is just starting to pick up this Breitbart tint. It's still in many places a supply-side Chamber of Commerce party. Bannon's trying to change the party wholesale. We'll see how far he can get next year.
So lucky to have the three of you to start things off tonight. Robert Costa, Ashley Parker, Jonathan Lemire, our thanks. Coming up after our first break, can Steve Bannon really fill the Senate, or try to, with this brand of Republicanism we've just been talking about? Plus, we'll talk to Nick Kristof of the New York Times, just back from North Korea, with some frightening details on life on the inside and how we are viewed these days. And up next, a man in the news today because of the interview he conducted with the president for Forbes that made a lot of news today. That and more when we continue on a Tuesday night. Welcome back. President Trump remains unconvinced that Russians interfered with the 2016 election. And worse, perhaps, he has never sounded the alarm as our president that we should secure the next elections in 2018 and 2020 from known Russian interference attempts. Despite findings by all of the U.S. intelligence agencies that the Kremlin tried to sway the outcome, Trump says he's waiting for more evidence on this front. In that wide-ranging Forbes interview we talked about earlier, he said this, quote, "It would bother me greatly if that's the case, and I look forward to seeing what the final reports are." Trump also claimed that he'd been cleared in the Russia investigation, saying, quote, "They also just said that there has been absolutely no collusion." They just said that yesterday, 2 days ago, the Senate. There has been no collusion. I didn't speak to Russians. Here, however, is the quote he's talking about. This is Chairman Richard Burr, North Carolina, from last week.
The issue of collusion is still open, that we continue to investigate both intelligence and witnesses, and that we're not in a position where we will come to any type of temporary finding on that until we've completed the process.
President Trump also addressed his unusually high staff turnover of late, saying, and this is a bit of a minefield here, "I've had some that I haven't been happy with, and that frankly, right now, I'm not thrilled with. I was disappointed. I thought they'd be better." Back with us, Associated Press correspondent Jonathan Lemire, and we welcome to the broadcast Randall Lane, editor for Forbes magazine, who was one of the two journalists, as they say, in the room where it happened for this interview. Welcome to you. We've all chewed on the quote about IQ testing. You were there, looking the man in the eye.
Yes.
Was there mirth, frivolity, sarcasm?
First, I will say it's a surreal experience to ask the President of the United States in the Oval Office, do you think the Secretary of State called you a moron? So that alone was memorable. But then, he paused. He gave kind of more of a general answer. He waited a few seconds, gave a more general answer about how there's some disagreement. I then asked the specific question about what Secretary Tillerson allegedly called her, and he went right into it. Now, I laughed after it. He didn't laugh. So whether or not that's a joke or not, it's probably only in President Trump's heart to really know. But I took it as a funny, but he was not laughing.
Well, this is the writer sitting next to you today who reminded Associated Press readers the remark landed with a distinct hint of malice. Sounds like that's about it.
Yeah, I think I got that one right.
Wow, for a fake news organization, the score one for the Associated Press. Just kidding. You had a conversation with the president, which means you were on a tour of kind of the emotional landscape.
Yes.
As they say, how did you find him?
I will say, and I've interviewed him many times over 20 years.
I know you have.
He was actually in good spirits, and he was very controlled, and he was fairly on message. So he was actually quite cogent, and a lot of things he knew what he wanted to say. We were talking a lot about economics, but again, there's some things when you go to staffing, when you go to trade deals,
Russia.
when you go to Russia. And again, I specifically pointed out that his own Homeland Security Department has already told states, 21 states, that they were infiltrated by the Russians. And I specifically said, okay, this has happened. What do you think? And he went to that answer about if there's proof, I will be mad about it, but I want to see the proof.
The president has always refused to acknowledge this. In his mind, it is the idea of legitimacy, right? That if there's any suggestion that a foreign power was involved, whether it was to obviously blatantly help him or just meddle at all, there's a suggestion that he wasn't fairly elected, and that therefore he was less of a president, and he just can't handle that. He said that repeatedly, time again, in public and in private.
You said something, as we say on another network tonight, that was so interesting about your time at Forbes. Compiling the list of the Forbes 400, of all the people whose wealth you have listed, and some of it is educated speculation based on available documents, you said one person on the list has kind of called to litigate the findings.
Yes, and it's an annual, we wrestle with it annually, and we said this before he ran for president, so this is not new information. Donald Trump cares more about where he ranks on the Forbes 400 than anyone in our 35-year history. There have been about 1,600 people that have cycled through the Forbes 400, and number one in terms of the person who really cares where he falls is Donald Trump. We used to have at Forbes what we call the Donald Trump rule, which whatever Donald Trump tells you, you divide by 3, and that probably is what he's really worth.
And it was mentioned tonight alongside his penchant for measurement of all things. In this case, he needed a bracket to measure himself against Tillerson. He chose IQ, which is really something you don't hear discussed in society.
It's funny, and we talk about it in the article. Numbers are very important to Donald Trump, and again, it explains a lot. It explains his obsession about crowd size. It explains why every time there's a bad poll, he attacks the messenger. Donald Trump's he's a businessman who always has been about the gut. And while we're in the age of big data, where most businesses are looking at data and then making decisions based on the data, Donald Trump is somebody who goes by instinct and gut and then looks for numbers to justify his gut. And that's why you see, and that's a common thread, and a lot of things we're seeing in his presidency is he's looking for numbers that validate what he already thinks he knows.
Even when it means comparing his height to a senator from Tennessee.
Little.
Great work, Randall. Thank you. Jonathan, as always, on the crest of the breaking news today and describing it for a national and global audience. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. We'll take another break, and coming up, New York Times columnist Nick Kristof, just back from his third trip to North Korea. He's here with some truly sobering revelations about what people in Pyongyang think about the possibility of nuclear war with our country. That and more when we continue.
After 18 holes of golf, I can tell you this without any hesitation. The president is committed to denying North Korea the ability to hit America with a nuclear weapon. Does that mean we go to war? No. Does that mean that war is possible? Yes.
Those comments from Senator Lindsey Graham come on the heels of his golf outing with the president yesterday. Tonight, we learned the president met with his national security team today. And this is important. A White House statement said in part, quote, "The briefing and discussion focused on a range of options to respond to any form of North Korean aggression or, if necessary, to prevent North Korea from threatening the United States and its allies with nuclear weapons." That last thing, by the way, taken as a reference to a preemptive attack of some sort on the North. Also tonight, NBC News is exclusively reporting the North Korean regime targeted the U.S. U.S. power grid with so-called spear phishing emails sent to several U.S. electrical companies containing malware. We are so happy that with us here tonight is Nicholas Kristof, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the New York Times. His piece in the Times this past weekend, which we commend to your attention, Inside North Korea and Feeling the Drums of War, gives us an inside look at that nation. He has just returned from there. Nick, can you share with our audience what you found, though, in the context of the brinksmanship talk from here currently?
So I think that President Trump is trying to intimidate the North Koreans with his talk of war, but in fact, it's having the opposite effect. So North Koreans everywhere are talking about it, and that's because the North Korean propaganda apparatus is trying to leverage President Trump's comments into buttressing their own narrative, which is that they are under threat, that they need these nuclear weapons to defend themselves from American imperialist aggression. And so everywhere you go in the North Korean capital, there is a military mobilization that I had not seen on previous trips. There is talk of how war being imminent, and what I found most eerie is that there is talk that such a war would not only be survivable, but they would actually emerge victorious. And you don't know whether they believe it. You would hope that their leaders would not believe it, but there is this, sad history of leaders becoming deceived by their own propaganda.
Have we become inured to this talk, casual talk of war between the North and the South, the North Korea and the United States? Remind folks just how many artillery tubes are dug in the North, aimed 24/7 and loaded at the South?
So there are about 11,000 artillery tubes that are aimed at the South and the DMZ. There are more in other parts of the country. And so just those artillery tubes,
conventional as they come. Yep.
The U.S. General Gary Luck estimated that there would be 1 million casualties from another war and $1 trillion in damage. But those estimates are outdated, because those don't involve nuclear weapons. And so the latest estimates are that on the very first day of another war, there would be 1 million deaths. I mean, just let that sink in. Yeah. And so I completely agree with you that of all the things that could go terribly wrong in the next few years, I think that the thing we need to be much more conscious of is another war with Korea. I think it's unlikely, but absolutely possible. And after my visit to North Korea, I came to believe it may be more likely than we would like to think.
There's a part of the North Korean psyche, and that of Kim Jong-un and his father before him, that craved validation. The verbiage from President Trump, some of it on a daily basis, does that equal validation?
So, I think that, it sounds strange to say this, but I think there's actually some parallel at this point in that I think both President Trump and Kim Jong-un are somewhat insecure and prone to immediately escalate. And when you have two leaders who are both prone to escalate and both have nuclear weapons, then that creates an enormously dangerous dynamic. And rather than being intimidated, each side is trying to intimidate the other. Instead, each is escalating. And you already have these forces on a hair trigger. We sent some B-1 bombers off the North Korean coast recently. North Korea did not scramble jets to intercept them, but you can imagine that sometime it might. If one of its planes gets shot down, maybe it'll accept that, or maybe it'll fire off some artillery tubes.
Have we already silently crossed the threshold into living with a de facto nuclear North Korea?
So, North Korea already has perhaps 20 nuclear warheads, perhaps as many as 60. It probably has the ability to deliver them in the region. It may have the ability to deliver them already to parts of the U.S. We don't really know. The last best hope is some kind of a deal that would stop testing of its missiles and its nuclear weapons. If we don't get that, then could we live with deterrence? We have deterred them reasonably well from invading the South, from using chemical and biological weapons. It might work. On the other hand, we didn't deter them from blowing up a South Korean airliner, for example. So there are limits to deterrence, but is it better than a war that would kill 1 million people on its first day? Every president until now, since 1969, when Richard Nixon had to decide how to respond to a U.S. plane being shot down, every president has decided that a war is not a feasible option. President Trump seems to be moving in a different direction.
On that ominous note, as we urge all our viewers to look up the journalism that came out of this last trip by Nick Kristof to North Korea, welcome home. Thank you very much for visiting us.
Good to be back.
Appreciate it. I'm sure it is. Another break for us. We're back with more, including the fracture among the Republicans in the Senate and House right after this.
It is incumbent upon them
to back President Trump's plan, but you don't see it. What you saw what Corker said today is what they talk about on Capitol Hill. That's when I left the White House. Remember, I said, I'm going after the Republican establishment, and we're going to go after them. You're going to see real candidates, and by the way, they're going to take on incumbents in every state, and they're going to take on the Democrats after
You said
that. Nobody's safe. We're coming after all of them, and we're going to win.
That was on Sean Hannity's show, Fox News last night. It got the attention deservedly of a lot of people last night into today. Steve Bannon declaring war on the elected Republican establishment, at least members of it who are not pulling their weight for the Trump agenda. He's plotting primary challenges against every Republican senator up for re-election, with the lone exception, it seems to be, of Ted Cruz. It's a strategy that worked in the Alabama special election earlier this month. The Bannon-backed candidate, Judge Roy Moore, beat out the McConnell Trump-supported Senator Luther Strange. Bannon's hoping for a repeat of a much larger scale in 2018. We're going to talk about this tonight, and joining it to do so, two of our favorites. Cornell Belcher, a Democratic pollster who worked on both of President Obama's campaigns and with a number of House and Senate Democrats, and David Jolly, recovering former Republican congressman from the great state of Florida. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. David, you're getting the first question. We talked about this with Robert Costa a little bit at the top of the broadcast. What if you get a subset of people who, when they have to choose, put R after their names, but they come in to Washington as part of a kind of Bannon nationalist Trump wing, and you go from having a controlling majority of Senate and House to maybe this fractured party?
Well, and I think that's a reality. The concerning moment tonight is the reason this is newsworthy is because we are living through Trump's Republican Party. Bob Corker would not be a news story if it wasn't the fact that he was challenging what is the norm of the Republican Party right now. And that is what we are living through and deciding, is this a temporary anomaly of the Republican Party, or is there permanency to this renting of the Republican Party of Donald Trump right now? And it is a very frightening moment for establishment Republicans, but the reality is establishment Republicans are losing. There are no Republicans in Washington, D.C. right now going back to their districts saying, vote for me because I have distanced myself from Donald Trump. If anything, they're going home trying to prove that they have saddled up with Donald Trump. And that suggests that this is Donald Trump's Republican Party, and Steve Bannon is empowered by that.
Okay, so Cornell, you've always been a fair dealer, and you've been in Democratic politics long enough to have any cockiness drained from you. So let me ask,
Zero cockiness.
how do the Democrats play this if you've got all these Republican incumbents getting primaried, and won't some of these primary challengers have an odd appeal to some of your party followers as well?
Well, there's a couple things at play here. One is, taking Democrat or Republican label off. This is problematic for the country, right? Because you see the civil war that's been happening in the Republican Party. I would argue ever since Barack Obama, the president I work for, got elected, and you hear this cry that so we're losing our country, take back our country, and the rise of the Tea Party. We've been talking about a civil war. Now that civil war is actually taking real shape and form, where you have people like Bannon on the nationalistic standpoint challenging Republicans. Look, we are in a really odd place when a straight down the line conservative like Senator Corker is being thrown or trying to be chased out of his party. All is foul and all is fair. There's something not quite right in the universe here, and that's, to me, is right. It's not about a danger to sort of Democrat or Republicans, it's a danger to our country, right? Because this civil war bleeds over, and Republicans are in charge of most of our government right now, and this civil war could hurt sort of our governing. When you have, and especially in the House, where you have most of the House seats right now gerrymandered in a way where incumbents aren't really challenged in the general election, they're challenged in the primary, and this drives the country further to the extreme of one side or the other with these challenges in the primaries. I don't think that makes for good governing. Now, from a Democratic standpoint, I think it does offer opportunities, because when you have, and I think on CNBC she had a poll out today or yesterday, showing where President Trump's numbers are dropping by double digits in many of the states, and this is important in states like Arizona and Nevada, where you do have Senate Republicans who are in really tough races, right? And the idea that you're going to challenge sitting incumbents and try to drive the party further to the right in states where, quite frankly, they're not Alabama, right? They're not Mississippi. You have states in the Midwest, and you have states on the coast where you do have Republican incumbents who have threaded the needle, and sort of they're conservative, but they've been able to hold sort of moderate independent voters. That far right wing that Bannon is talking about, I don't see how they hold on to independence. And when you look at where Donald Trump's support has dropped the most, it hasn't dropped among base Republicans. It has dropped dramatically among independent voters who are turned off by what they're seeing. I think it's potentially disastrous for the Republican Party, but also disastrous for America, this challenge that Bannon's putting forward.
So, Congressman, come off that point. Is this a coming storm that is it's going to come anyway, and it has to get out of the system of these forces within your party?
Sure. So, look, Republicans are dancing with the devil right now, but it's the only date they have at the ball, if you will. I would also say, though, Republicans or Democrats are not organized either. The Democrats are just as disorganized as Republicans right now. It's just we have a seat at the table to see the Republicans' disorganization. But the reality is Donald Trump has not built a coalition of Republicans since he got to office. He's only lost his base, or lost from 40% down to 32%. And so what do Republicans do going into this? It is an opportunity, as Cornell said, for Democrats to capture. But I don't think they're there yet.
Cornell, in 30 seconds or less, what do Democratic candidates, House and Senate, across this country need to do?
Well, we need to move away from this ideal that there's simply an economics message to this, because understand that core group of voters who are anxious about America's future, Hillary Clinton won the voters most anxious about economics. We've got to speak to the real angst in this country, and that's the racial divide. We're not going to grow wider as a country. Democrats have to have a message that says, you know what, white working, blue-collar workers, African Americans, Hispanics are not your enemy on this. We're going to get through this together, or we're going to fail.
You're not going to win. You're not going to win Main Street on that one, Cornell. Sorry.
If we don't, God help us.
The great thing is we get to continue this conversation with both of you gentlemen, former Congressman David Jolly and Cornell Belcher, easily the best accessorized man in Democratic politics. Thank you both.
It's a low bar.
It is a pleasure to have you. Thanks, guys. Another break for us. Coming up, we get an update from the conditions out west. That and more when the 11th hour continues. 17 people confirmed dead. More than 180 people are still unaccounted for tonight as tens of thousands of acres continue to burn across mostly northern California wine country. Wildfires have destroyed over 2,000 structures, some of them landmarks, and over 20,000 people are on the move tonight, having been forced to leave their homes. Before and after photos tell the story. Some neighborhoods are simply gone. Satellite photos show the smoke plumes, and remember, unlike most of our weather, they flow in reverse from east to west because of the Santa Ana winds flowing down off the mountains out onto the sea. Nighttime satellite images show how much of the state is on fire. The lights to the north of San Francisco are fires visible from space and not lit up population centers. Listen to the Napa County Fire Chief today talking about the scope and the sprawling and relentless firefight.
The fires are still out there. They are still actively growing. We will be updating acreage and containment daily as we get that information. Resources still continue to be limited. We have folks on the fire line starting their third shift right now that have not been relieved because there's folks not available to come in with so many fires in the area. We are having to share resources as there are many priorities in the communities that are being affected by this.
Remember, 3 shifts means 24 hours at a time, not stopping. California Congressman Mike Thompson, who represents Napa and Sonoma counties, surveyed the damage today and said this, quote, "It's devastating. I fully expect this will be the worst fire disaster in California history." That's saying a lot. With us on the phone tonight from Santa Rosa, California, NBC News correspondent Joe Fryer. Joe, update us as of tonight.
Hey there, Brian. Well, you know, the winds did die down considerably today. That's giving firefighters a little bit of a chance. The fires didn't grow. Those acreage numbers didn't really get any higher. But still, for most of these major fires, the containment is zero, and the forecast is calling for wind gusts to pick up again over the next couple days, so the danger is far from over. We spent today in Santa Rosa's Coffee Park community, and that's where the entire neighborhoods are gone. You could stand in one spot, look out, and every single house within sight is no longer there. A number of people returning home, digging through the rubble to see what they can save. It's there we ran into Brian Gilman. He was looking for his mom's ruby ring. Believe it or not, he found it, the ring largely intact. He also found her teacups, which she also wanted. That meant a lot to him. She's been battling cancer, so to be able to get those items for her, it's not much, but it's the least that can happen in a situation like this. Brian?
Joe Fryer with an update of the hardest hit community, Santa Rosa, and one of the sadder stories today, among those who didn't make it, a couple ages 198. The fire simply arrived too quickly for them to move out of their homes. Unbelievable scenes tonight in California. Joe, thanks. Another break for us. And coming up, was that a rule change we witnessed on live television from the White House today? That when the 11th hour continues.
The people of this country want tax cuts. They want lower taxes. We're the highest taxed nation in the world.
Last thing before we go here tonight, a rare chance to witness a new fact being born. We want to show you just one exchange out of many at today's White House briefing. It's about taxes and a claim the president is fond of making, and one reporter who's just not having it anymore, and a press secretary slipping in a new word.
Follow-ups there on taxes. The president repeated this claim in the Oval Office today, saying we're the highest tax nation in the world. Why does the president keep saying this? It's not true overall.
We are the highest taxed corporate tax in the developed economy. That's a fact.
But that's not what the president said.
That's what he's talking about. We are the highest corporate taxed country in the developed economies across the globe.
Sure, so that's accurate, but the president keeps repeating this claim that we're the highest tax nation.
And that's what we are, the highest tax corporate nation.
That's not what he said. He said we're the highest tax nation in the world.
The highest tax corporate nation. That seems pretty consistent to me. Sorry, we're just gonna have to really disagree.
So that's how that happens. And just so we can agree on one set of facts, the United States is not the highest tax nation in the developed world or any other world. That distinction, according to analysis by the BBC, belongs to Denmark. Of course, then you get to live in Denmark. The highest corporate taxes. Matt Nussbaum reported on this today for Politico with an expert at the Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center telling him, quote, the correct statement is that the U.S. has the highest statutory corporate income tax rate in the developed world. But a recent NPR fact check on this very same topic also notes what a lot of people already know, that is, many businesses end up paying far less than the statutory rate. We'll have to leave it at that. That is our broadcast for a Tuesday night. Thank you so much for being here with us. Good night from NBC News headquarters here in New York.